Virginia is one day away from electing its next governor. Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican nominee Glenn Youngkin spent the weekend trying to drum up last-minute support. A Republican hasn't won statewide office in Virginia since 2009, but polls show this is a close race. Later today, former President Donald Trump is expected to speak at a virtual tele-rally to campaign for Youngkin. Politico politics reporter Maya Kaine joins us now to discuss. Maya, good to see you. So tomorrow, November 2nd, polls for Virginia's gubernatorial race will be closed. What's at stake with this election? Particularly, not just what's at stake for Virginians, but talk to me about the Democratic Party writ large.
Yeah, Democrats are really watching what's happening in Virginia as a bellwether, a harbinger, whatever you want to describe it as, for their prospects in 2022. As you point out, a Republican has not won in the Commonwealth statewide in over a decade. And so the fact that this race is so close was to be expected. But now that it's in toss-up territory, a number of Democrats that I've spoke to and my colleagues are saying that they really are counting on McAuliffe to really pull out a win here and calling up all of their forces and everybody that they can across the state, because a loss for Democrats there would not only be a sign of their prospects next year, that things might not be looking as bright as they thought, but also it could dim enthusiasm among the base in other states. And it could also slow progress here in Washington. The big push right now that Democrats in Virginia are calling for is more progress on Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, actual passage of it possibly this week. And so with a loss in Virginia on Tuesday atop the ticket for Democrats, that could slow a lot of things down for the party.
So over the weekend, both candidates spent time talking to voters. I want to play a little bit of sound from both of them.
I'm very proud as your governor. I kept all 16 women's clinics open here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Had I not been elected, there would not be one clinic open today. Those are the differences it makes. And what happened? We made our state open and welcoming. I'm the first governor after the historic Supreme Court ruling to perform a gay marriage in the United States of America. And what we're trying to send a message to everybody, this is an open and welcoming state.
On one side of the ballot is Terry McAuliffe, who thinks that government should stand between parents and their children, who thinks that government should tell you whether your employer should fire you or keep you. He thinks that government should force you to join a union. He thinks that he can raise taxes without telling you about it. Friends, that's government control. On the other side of the ballot is Virginians' freedom. On the other side of the ballot is our liberty. And let me tell you, while my name is on the ballot, it's your name on there with me.
So both candidates are going to be holding events in Virginia Beach. And, you know, we've been told over and over again that in these final days before the election, it's all about igniting the base, getting them passionate enough that they make sure that they show up at the polls. And so I want to ask you, based on the messaging that we're getting from these two candidates, who are they trying to ignite and how are they going about doing it?
Well, what you're hearing from both of the candidates now is a message that's kind of in line with the national message. Of course, both McAuliffe and Youngkin have aimed to push now in these final days a message that focuses more on policies that impact Virginians. But really who they're going after, I think now they're paying attention to what's happening in Washington. That's independent voters, that's moderate Republicans who might have soured on Trump but might be rethinking their party allegiances. And of course, mentioning the Tidewater region, which is heavily black, it's absolutely black voters. My colleague Elena Schneider and I are out with a piece today talking about the fact that black support is really going to be a deciding factor for both Democrats and Republicans in this race. It's not so much a matter of whether or not black voters vote for McAuliffe or Youngkin, but whether or not they turn out in the same numbers that we saw them do in 2020 and even in 2017 when they supported Ralph Northam. Or whether or not they just stay home altogether. So really, I think the strategy that you're seeing with both Youngkin and McAuliffe in animating the base, it's a method to gin up turnout. This is a race that is going to come down to the voters who are most passionate and the voters who really care about these issues. We know that turnout in off-year elections tends to be lower, and that's why this last-ditch effort to go after black voters, to go after independents, and even as you see Youngkin talking about education as a big issue in this race, going after parents and those in the Virginia exurbs and suburbs in Northern Virginia. I mean, these are all components of the base for both parties, and they're absolutely up for grabs. That's why you see such a heavy push now in these last few days, really few hours, for these voters to turn out and head to the polls on Tuesday.
You know, Maya, it's interesting to me. Oftentimes, I think all journalists, we all fall into this trap of sometimes making what are complicated issues or complicated dynamics, sort of pat, because we have headlines and we have banners that roll across our screens, if you're in broadcast journalism, that sometimes make things seem more simple than they really are. And so the question that I have for you is, a lot of people have suggested that why Youngkin is doing well is because he's been able to take one of these hot button issues that you're talking about here, education, specifically how racial inequality is taught or not taught in Virginia schools, and he's turned that into something that has rallied voters to his side. Let's remember that President Biden won the state of Virginia by 10 points, so this was not a Trump state. And so I wonder, though, if it really can be distilled into that one issue, for example, or if there's a larger problem with Democrats in the state overall, given President Biden's low approval ratings, given that he's not been able to pass legislation because there's been this ongoing battle, this issue between moderates and progressives in his own party.
Well, this is absolutely an election that's going to be fought at the margins, and Republicans are well aware of that. They know what the stakes are, and I think what a number of Republican operatives have pointed out to me is it's not exactly, you're right, as cut and dried as we think. This is not going to be, and by any means, a landslide win for either candidate. However, what Youngkin has aimed to do and what Republicans are aiming to push now in their message is in laying into education, their hope is that they can, at the margins, stave off some either independent support, moderate Republican support, especially among these very Democratic Northern Virginia counties, to kind of cut into McAuliffe's gains. I think that's the same message that they're hoping will dim black turnout in Central and Southern Virginia. And again, also looking at these national issues, they really are no small thing. And that's what Youngkin has really aimed to saturate the airwaves with, talking about rising prices in the economy, talking about groceries and grocery taxes. I mean, these are kind of niche Virginia issues, but they do resonate with a broad swath of voters across the Commonwealth. And I think that the calculus, particularly for Republicans, again, is to just get enough support at the margins, just get whatever the threshold is that they can of these voters across the state to cut into some Democratic gains and possibly take back the governor's mansion on Tuesday.
So speaking of the shadow of the Oval Office and the way it hangs over this race, the former occupant, President Trump, former President Trump, he's going to be holding a tele-rally for Youngkin. Now, Youngkin has been kind of walking this tightrope. I know sometimes it's characterized like he's distancing himself from Donald Trump. I don't think he's actually distancing himself, but he's also, not campaigning with him. So I'm curious as to what sort of impact you think the former president will have in terms of this kind of virtual rally that he's holding for Youngkin.
I think this represents one last push, as we've discussed, for the base to animate turnout and push the party's message. Republicans are well aware that Trump is still very much the leader of the party, and that Republican voters who are really animated and those who do vote and turn out tend to be very animated by his message. You're right. Youngkin has really been careful not to align himself too closely with the former president, well aware of the fact that Virginia has for a long time not been friendly territory for Republicans. But I think what you'll hear from the former president, tonight, will be a message that is just aimed to get folks to the polls on Tuesday, talking about election integrity, talking about Biden's how he feels President Biden has been doing, which will likely be a litany of complaints about his job thus far, and highlighting a number of what Republicans perceive as Democratic failures over the last few months: gridlock in Washington, rising prices, this that perhaps there's a lack of control when you have Democrats in control of all three branches of government in Washington. One message that has resonated with independent voters and moderate Republicans has been this idea of bringing balanced government back to the Commonwealth. That might be an argument that you hear the former president, make this evening, in talking about having Republicans atop the ticket again could actually restore some level of balance to the Commonwealth. And so there's certainly a message that all of us will be expecting from the president. I think it depends on just how he delivers it, whether it will be something that goes extremely far right, in line with the base just to animate them, or kind of stays a little bit closer to what Youngkin is hoping, which is towing the line between a solid Republican MAGA message and something that just aligns with a broader swath of conservatives.
And yet, Maya, real quick before we let you go, the former president released a statement where he called into question Virginia's election integrity, saying he's not a believer in the integrity of Virginia's elections. He goes on to say in the statement, lots of bad things are going on. No one knows what he's talking about. He provided no evidence or any proof of that. But I wonder, is Youngkin subscribing to that very same notion? In other words, if Youngkin loses this race, is he also going to get on this bandwagon and suggesting that the election was somehow rigged the way the former president does? And if he loses the election, does that rejigger the calculus for Republicans attaching their wagons too closely to Donald Trump?
Well, Youngkin has for a long time had to straddle the line between whether or not he believes in election integrity. He campaigned, his first message was on an election integrity message, and then he quickly backed away from it when he was called out for it being too in line with Trump. But I will point out also that Virginia has passed a number of laws that over the last few weeks that really do open up access to the ballot, expanding mail-in voting and absentee voting that make it a lot easier for folks in the Commonwealth to vote. So if Youngkin does indeed lose and start to call into question whether or not these results were valid under these new laws that actually do expand access to the ballot, there will be really broad implications for, I think, how other Republicans might handle statewide losses in blue states in 2022.
Well, we already know, I think, over 700, I think maybe over 750,000 people have already cast their ballots early voting. Maya King, thank you so much.
Thanks.